The Bible statements regarding the body and the soul lead to a view of psychology known as dualism. Dualism is the belief that human nature consists of two fundamental kinds of reality: the body, which is physical or material, and the mind, which is spiritual or immaterial. Humanistic worldviews, however, believe in monism, the belief that the mind and the brain are one and the same. Only the Christian worldview, with its affirmation of psychological dualism, can effectively account for the nature of human behavior.
Dualism is the view that animals and human beings are composed of a body, which is physical, and a soul, which is non-physical. Now, an animal soul is clearly taught in the Bible. Genesis and Revelation teach that animals have souls, but they do not survive the death of their bodies. The animal soul is very different from a human soul. The animal soul does not have moral understanding and other things like that. But animals have consciousness, and the human soul is much more complicated than the animal soul.
The basic issue in psychology today revolves around the concept of soul, spirit, and mind. The atheistic, reductionistic position, by reduction here I mean you reduce the mind to the brain, you reduce the brain to matter, you reduce the matter to chemical elements and so forth, and you determine, the conclusion is man is simply matter in motion. From the Christian perspective, we argue that man is more than matter. Man is also mind. He's soul.
It is the soul that contains an animal or a human's consciousness, its thoughts, feelings, experiences, pains, and so on. And the soul is what makes the body alive.
Biblical Christian psychology addresses the sinful nature of human beings. Understanding this reality is critical for understanding people's nature and mental processes. People's sinful natures and desires to rebel against God are the source of most psychological problems.
If you don't understand that human beings are sinful, you don't understand human beings, and you won't know how to treat them. Any therapeutic method that is built on the inherent goodness of human beings is going to go awry, because you're going to ignore the fact that there's hate in the hearts of human beings.
Unlike humanistic worldviews, which claim that guilt is the byproduct of evil social institutions, the Biblical Christian Worldview acknowledges the fallen nature of humans and the guilt that results from sinning against God.
If you believe that human beings are basically good and you overlook our fallen nature, then you focus simply on guilt feelings. And so humanistic psychologists, for example, don't try to address real guilt, but rather address guilt feelings. And those guilt feelings come from archaic social institutions like the family or the church, maybe outdated value systems as well. And so they address the feelings of guilt rather than real guilt itself. In contrast to that, the Christian perspective acknowledges the fallen nature of human beings, and we also want to address the feelings of guilt and the real guilt that may be behind those feelings of guilt as well. We recognize that real guilt comes from our failure to love God and love our neighbor. And so, in contrast to a humanistic perspective that says that we need to redefine or repress guilt and guilt feelings, the Christian perspective acknowledges human responsibility. It calls for repentance, and it seeks reconciliation with God and with human beings.
Another difference between Christian and humanistic psychology is in the area of suffering. Whereas humanistic psychologies attempt to alleviate all personal suffering, Christian psychology believes that God can use suffering to bring about positive development in an individual. As William Kilpatrick wrote, "The real test of a theory or way of life is not whether it can relieve pain, but what it says about the pain it cannot relieve." And this is where I believe secular psychology lets us down and Christian psychology supports us.
There are things that God has to teach us about Himself and about ourselves that we could not learn any other way than through suffering, and that therefore suffering may well be a part of God's economy for humanity to bring people to a knowledge of Himself.
Christian psychology believes that God can use suffering to bring about positive development in an individual. Finding meaning in suffering is a feature that is unique to Christian psychology.